All right, today we're going to pull back the curtain on a question that is absolutely critical. How do we actually count carbon? Let's get right into it.
You've seen it, I've seen it, it's everywhere. On websites, in ads, on the box your stuff comes in. Big companies are making these really bold promises to go green, slash emissions, and, build a more sustainable world. And that's a great thing.
But here's the million-dollar question, right? When a company says it's carbon neutral or has cut its footprint, what does that really mean? How do we know if we're looking at actual, meaningful change or just some really clever marketing?
Well, the answer, like with so many things, is in the data. There's an old saying, you can't manage what you don't measure. And to really get a grip on climate impact, you absolutely need a clear, consistent, and credible way to do the accounting.
So let's go beyond those green promises and get into the real nuts and bolts. We need to understand the tools that turn these vague goals into hard, verifiable numbers.
Think about it. Without a standard ruler, every company could just make up its own way of measuring things. That would make comparing them totally impossible. And, frankly, it just opens the door wide for greenwashing, where the claims sound fantastic, but there's no substance behind them. We need a shared system to keep everyone honest.
And that brings us to the two main rulers that professionals use today. On one hand, you have greenhouse gas accounting, which is all about the big picture view of an entire company. And on the other hand, you have the life cycle assessment, or LCA, which zooms way in to tell the complete story of a single product. Let's start with the company-wide view. So greenhouse gas accounting, think of this as a company's annual carbon report card. It's a full-on inventory of every single greenhouse gas that the organization is responsible for releasing over a whole year.
And the process itself? It's actually pretty logical. First, you identify every single source of emissions. We're talking everything from factory smokestacks to the trucks that deliver their products. Then you collect all the data for that activity. That lets you calculate the emissions, and finally, you can report the whole picture.
Now, at the heart of all this is a surprisingly simple formula. You take your activity data, that could be how many gallons of fuel you burned or how much electricity you used, and you multiply it by an emission factor. Now, that factor is a scientifically proven number that basically translates your activity into the amount of greenhouse gas it spits out.
Okay, let's make this real. Imagine a company's generator burned 500 gallons of diesel. Simple. We take that 500 gallons and multiply it by diesel-specific emission factor, which is 10.21 kilograms of CO2 for every gallon. Boom, 5,105 kilograms of CO2. Easy, right? But there's a catch. CO2 isn't the only gas we need to worry about.
And this is a really crucial point. Burning fuel doesn't just release carbon dioxide. It also lets out other greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide. And those guys are way, way more powerful when it comes to trapping heat in the atmosphere. So to get a truly accurate picture, we have to convert everything into one standard unit, the carbon dioxide equivalent, or CO2e. And we do that using something called the global warming potential, or GWP.
And this table shows you exactly how that works. Look at how tiny the actual amounts of methane and nitrous oxide are. Barely anything. But when you multiply them by their global warming potential, 25 times for methane, and a jaw-dropping 298 times for nitrous oxide, their impact suddenly becomes a big deal. You add it all up, and you get a much more honest total. Now, let's zoom in from the whole company to a single product.
So we've looked at the big picture for a whole company. Now let's zoom way, way in and look at a single product. This is where that second ruler, the life cycle assessment, or LCA, comes into play. It's like writing the complete environmental biography of an object, from the moment it's conceived to the day it's thrown away.
So what is an LCA? Well, as the definition says, it's about quantifying everything. Every single resource that was used, every puff of emissions that was created, all of it across the entire journey of that product. It's the ultimate holistic view. And this journey is famously called cradle to grave. It literally starts with digging the raw materials out of the ground, then processing them, manufacturing the thing, shipping it to the store, and then to you, accounting for the energy it uses during its life, and finally, what happens to it at the very end.
And here's exactly why that cradle-to-grave view is so important. It helps us avoid something called shifting burdens. A perfect example, making a car with super lightweight materials is great, right? It means the car uses less fuel. But what if producing those fancy lightweight materials created a ton of extra pollution back at the factory? An LCA exposes those trade-offs, so we don't accidentally solve one problem just by creating an even bigger one somewhere else.
Okay, so we have these two incredibly powerful tools for crunching the numbers.
But data by itself is, well, it's just data. It's only useful if it actually leads to better decisions. So let's see how this stuff drives real-world change.
Check out this awesome case study. A company was using a fluid in its cooling systems that had a global warming potential of 10,000. That is 10,000 times more potent than CO2. Insane. But they found a potential replacement with a GWP of just 270. And the result of that one single switch? Look at that number. An annual reduction of almost 44,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. To put that into perspective, that's like taking nearly 10,000 cars off the road every single year. That's a massive impact, and it was all driven by the data.
And these detailed calculations aren't just for one-off projects. They form the absolute bedrock of a company's whole climate transition plan. That's their roadmap for how they're going to get to a low-carbon future. And in places like Singapore, having one of these credible plans is actually becoming mandatory for big companies.
So, let's zoom all the way out. We've been down in the weeds with formulas and acronyms, but why is this so important for all of us, really?
Why does all this counting matter? Because it changes everything. It gives governments the hard data they need to create smart policies. It gives us, as consumers, the power to make genuinely informed choices. It cuts through the noise and separates the companies that are taking real action from the ones just talking a good game. And maybe most importantly, it shines a giant spotlight on exactly where we need to innovate to build a cleaner world.
You know, this ability to measure our impact with such precision is like a brand new superpower for humanity. It gives us a kind of clarity we've never had before. So the question isn't really what we can do anymore. The question is, with all this new knowledge, what will we choose to do? Thanks for joining me.